أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين شفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا بالقاسم محمد. Thank you. وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين ولعنة الله الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا بأبي عبد الله الحسين عليه الصلاة والسلام. Continuing with our topic, briefly, tonight is the night of the great lion of Ali and the lion of Abu Abdullah, and we do wish to spend a lot of time in narrating the incident of Abbas Salamullah alayh. We were talking of Tawbah as the continuous process of unveiling or breaking the limits. Once we come at the point of acknowledgement that this is what I truly am, in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and intimately revealing ourselves without any inhibitions, then we embark on this constant process of unveiling. And this process of unveiling becomes arduous as we progress on the journey and becomes more difficult as we arrive within the folds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Rumi says, "O you who bears the goblet, rotate the wine to me, let me quench my thirst. For indeed love seemed such an easy task at the outset. Who knew it shall become so difficult to bear?" This is the truth of life. Suffering surmount as we go through life. And we want to talk at length about suffering in the spiritual context. But Tawbah in itself becomes more and more challenging and more difficult. And how may it not be? For it is a person breaking their mold, their identity, and the newer identity that they acquire seems more invincible than the former because it is made through Allah, and even that is a representation of a greater idol. Until the full I in my identity is effaced, the journey is not completed. Until and unless the soul is not burned within the raging pits of hell, it is not purified of itself. That pit of hell, that rage, is the purifying agent that effaces the self from itself. And look at how we get caught up in these veils. And look at how the inner demon, which is I myself, works to make me pleased and content within the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how I become complacent at every stage in my journey, and how that stage, which was meant to be a mere means, becomes an end within itself. You've heard of Zakir Naik. He went onto the podium and he stated Yazid rahmahullah and did not curse Yazid. When asked, why did you not curse Yazid? Why did you send God's or invoke God's blessing upon Yazid? His answer was, and this is an insightful answer. Looking at Zakir Naik, one began to introspect within one's own self to understand that actually what he is saying, I too advocate the same thing of sort. He stated, the great Imam Ghazali has said, we may not curse Yazid. He stated other grand tabi'een have said these things. What I'm asking here is, look at how Islam in itself becomes a veil. And Tawbah at that greater level is even breaking of this Islam when it becomes a veil. So what if Imam Ghazali says you cannot curse Yazid? Does it mean we suspend our reasoning? So what if a Sahabi says you can't condemn Yazid? So what? What value does a Sahabi have anyway? Tell me, the people who are around the Prophet, what value do they have? They have, by Allah, no value unless they are on the truth. Look at the Quran in itself, this glorious book of Allah. Even that is secondary to me. Had I wanted, I would not have accepted the Quran and rejected it, and the Quran would not have meant a thing to me, as most of the people of this world do. Even the Quran is secondary to me. Forget the Quran. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, even He is secondary to me accepting Him. Imagine the level at which we are talking. So what if a grand Sahabi has said, if it doesn't make sense, so what? But isn't this the very fate from which we are suffering? That Islam is saying this. Once we evolve, begin to evolve after acknowledgement of point zero, when we begin to evolve, we actually become caught up at times in a much denser veil. Believe me, it is very easy when you have a clean slate. But when the slate has such sophisticated roadmaps to find your way around in there, becomes much difficult. Today, if Islam says this and Islam says that, what do? We follow it, don't we? Does a lot of it make sense? I know this must be very difficult and painful for the ears to hear. It must be so painful for the ears to hear. But hear it. But hear it. If Islam says something which does not make sense at all, does a free man submit to it and follow it? Of course not. We want Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. And even Islam cannot become a veil in the process of finding Allah. Islam in the truest sense is that fluid flow, expansion and growth. If Islam says something which is totally absurd, we should understand that this is not Islam of Allah, it is Islam of man. It has nothing to do with Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. By God, if we were to revert to the core of our beings, if we were to revert to the very basic, the very untarnished reality of me and you, which has not been touched by any hands, which has not been molded, and if at that point we were to be asked, what is the Allah that you seek? Then I will say, oh Allah, if it was up to me to worship a Lord that is worthy, then I will only worship Allah, who is the most merciful of all. My Allah's mercy knows no end. It is limitless mercy. I will only worship that Allah who is nothing but love. If that Allah can place so much love in the heart of a mother, which is not even a weak ray of His beauty, then imagine how the love of Allah should be. My Allah, the one that I yearn and the one that I want to worship, should be the most tolerant God, should be the most encouraging God, should be the most forgiving God, should be the most friendly God. If I make a mistake in the process,